Order, order, and welcome to this afternoon's session of the Energy Security and Net Zero Select Committee. And this afternoon we have two panels continuing the committee's inquiry on building support for the energy transition. And in our first panel we're looking at costs and benefits to households, and I will ask our panellists if you will introduce yourselves before we start the questions. So yes, please.
Hello, my name's Maria Booker. I'm Head of Policy at Fair by Design. Fair by Design is the campaign that aims to eliminate the poverty premium. So that's the extra money that people on low incomes spend on essentials like energy, insurance and credit. I'm here today primarily to share the views of people with lived experience of living on low incomes and their views on the transition.
Well, thank you. We will explore these points further, and my colleagues have additional questions on that point. And Maria Booker, do you think people are poorly equipped to judge the efficacy of low carbon technologies?
So the research that we've done with people with lived experience has shown that people would like more information and advice about what they need to do to decarbonise their homes in particular. But as Ewan said, they feel that the biggest barriers are cost. They don't feel they will be able to afford the big kind of upfront costs that are needed to upgrade their homes or to buy their smart technology needed. And for renters in particular, so that's nearly 40% of households, they feel that they have a lack of control over what happens to their home. So private renters feel that it's landlord's decision about whether those upgrades get made, and social renters are concerned about how the cost of those are charged back through service charges.
Well, thank you very much. I will pass on to Vera Hophouse, who I think will have some questions that follow up neatly on some of what you've all just said. Vera.
Thank you, and thank you for coming and starting to answer questions. Going straight into the heart of things, I think the private rented sector has been raised as a concern in this committee and elsewhere. Absolutely, you don't have the control over it, and I think some sort of schemes that actually address people in the private sector is probably very, very important. But let us sort of go into how effective has the government actually been with its communication about the costs and benefits of transition to low carbon technologies. And my sort of sub-question, although I'm fully bought into that it would be much more effective not to get to net zero, how honest is the government actually been about the whole cost of net zero as such? Do you have an opinion on that one? Is the government actually honest about the costs?
So I'd say that there are sort of three stages. There's the sort of substance of what you're offering to people about the transition. There's how you communicate it, and then there's their experience of taking those steps and whether it's a good experience. And I think we still need to focus on the first one in terms of the substance. So in terms of how the benefits and costs of net zero are going to be shared, that although the overall benefits are very clear, it's not clear what the distribution will be. And we wrote to Ofgem 2 months ago and asked them to update their distributional impact analysis that they'd done in 2021, because it's been done before the energy crisis, and the data they used wasn't very robust in the first place. And what they said is that they're going to wait until we're nearly all the way through market half-hourly settlement until they do that analysis again. And what we really need to be seeing is the system designed to be fair by design from the start, and to make sure that we know what the benefits are going to look like and to be addressing those proactively up front. And of course the costs are going to be consulted on later this year as well. So we need to get the offer right before we can start to talk about the communication.
And would you say currently it's a bit confused, also as a concept from the government?
So it's just not clear how the benefits are going to be shared. So the original impact assessment done in 2021 showed that there was as much variation within groups as between groups, but it was based largely on a study done in London, and that excluded quite important groups like people on prepayment meters and people on dual fuel tariffs. So basically, we don't really know how the benefits are going to be shared, and we would like to see Ofgem updating that analysis. Just to add on the communications front, the research we did showed that people on low incomes wanted a diverse range of channels, so there wasn't a one-size-fits-all. So some people preferred the face-to-face approach, some people were happy to go online. To echo the point about trusted intermediaries, people wanted to to hear from trusted people.
What practical steps could suppliers take to rebuild consumer trust? Because, as we say, there's already an inherent problem. Have you got anything to out there?
Well, just that people we spoke to in the research said that they actually wanted to hear more from energy suppliers. They wanted a proactive conversation. They wanted energy suppliers to reach out with them with more information and advice. But at the same time, they were giving the message as well that they didn't have much trust in energy suppliers. So maybe it's about building up that relationship and, from a low base, but learning again to trust those companies and that advice. I think there's also something about people sticking to their word. So we've heard from a lot of people who've had a bad experience, say, of having a smart meter fitted. So we had one person in our focus group who'd had a smart meter fitted for good reason. She had a long-term health condition, so she had to go to the shop to have it topped up. It was going to save her that journey all the time, so she was really pleased to get a smart meter fitted. After 2 weeks it stopped working. 6 months later when we met her, she still hadn't had it fixed. She'd had letters of apology, but still not an actual solution. And she was absolutely terrified of what the bill was going to be when it arrived. So there's somebody on a very fixed income. Energy bills had gone up during that time, and she had no idea what that final bill was going to be. So you can understand in those circumstances why people are kind of reluctant to take that risk of changing anything if there's a sort of financial downside like that.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome. We've had some quite alarming statistics around energy literacy. For example, only 1 in 11 18 to 24-year-olds could identify the correct definitions of all 6 common bill terms, and around 8.5 million UK adults lack fundamental digital skills, such as accessing online billing or using apps. So I just really want to ask a few questions around how much this matters. So taking that stat about the 18 to 24-year-olds not being able to identify the definitions, how concerned should we be about that? Maria, do you want to start?
So I think there's a general point about how much we expect consumers to engage in the market and whether we put the onus on them or whether the systems should be easier to understand. One of our concerns is that we're moving to, people are already saying that the energy market doesn't work well for them, but we're sort of moving to an energy market which is the same as now but on steroids. So it's more complicated, more different advice, more different tariffs, and we're expecting people to navigate that maze. So when the Competition and Markets Authority looked at the energy market in 2016, they did a survey of 7,000 customers and sort of found categorically that the survey provided material evidence of domestic customers' lack of understanding of and engagement in retail energy markets. And the question is, like, what's changed? Do we expect people to navigate it differently from now on? So I think there's work to be done in terms of helping people to navigate it and to improving energy literacy. But I think on the other side, there's also work to be done in making sure that people who aren't going to engage in the energy market and don't want to are still protected from any kind of downside. And we would agree with what Ewan said about the importance of having a social tariff or long-term bill support to ensure that people are always going to be able to afford the energy they need to stay safe and well, regardless of how well they want to or can navigate the energy system. Maybe just worth pointing out the work that the Centre for Sustainable Energy have done on a sort of energy capabilities lens, which looks at different factors which feed into somebody being able to access the benefits. So they include sort of where you live and the sort of house you live in, but also your digital skills and also your personal and social values and your mindset towards it.
Yeah, thank you. Maria Booker, you mentioned the half-hourly settlement system earlier, I think, in one of your answers, and I wondered if you just how far you think it is possible to use this to really bring down bills and benefit consumers.
So it's the first step in the process, really, apart from after the smart meter rollout. So when the market half-hourly settlement arrangements come in, suppliers will be having to settle for each half hour of electricity, and they're going to be incentivised to push that onto consumers, and the expectation is that that will result in more time of use tariffs. Yep. So in terms of whether that's going to bring down bills for consumers, the point I was making earlier is that we're not really sure. It's likely to affect different consumers differently, but the analysis that's been done to date is not very good. It's not based on very robust data. It doesn't take into account all the pilots that have been done since 2021. And what we'd like to see is a better analysis of what all those pilots show, so that if there are concerns about particular groups that might be disadvantaged, then sort of proactive measures can be put in place to address that.
Yes. Has anybody carried out a more detailed analysis that you're aware of?
There are sort of different academic institutions that have looked at particular trials, but as far as we're aware, there hasn't been a very good kind of meta-analysis.
Okay. Make an appeal from this session to the academics out there watching to perhaps
we think it's Ofgem's job to do that. Yeah. They need to know what...
That's very helpful.
We haven't done any in-depth work at geographical differences, but just to say that our focus groups on energy focused on people in Scotland, and in particular in the north of Scotland, there was a feeling that people who live close to energy generation felt a disconnect between seeing this local energy generation on their doorsteps, but also possibly having higher energy bills due to the rural location in which they lived.
So would you say that you think there's merit in allowing communities to feel kind of greater ownership of the system rather than kind of passive recipients of it, and what kind of would you recommend to?
I think it's just to echo what Sarah said really about taking a local approach, that not all areas will feel the same about the energy transition, or because their local context is different.
And what would you most like to see included in DESNZ's public participation strategy?
I can start. We'd really like to see a focus on involving people directly. In terms of DESNZ's response to this committee, we could see a lot about marketing and communication and education, but we think the key to getting a fair transition is having people with lived experience involved in shaping the solutions. So we'd really like to see a focus on that.
Is there anywhere where you would highlight where that's been done well, either in the UK or elsewhere?
In terms of government?
Well, where communities have had that sense of ownership over a scheme, and that government should look at and say, well, actually, that's a good example of either local government policy or maybe a community organisation's done it. I don't know.
There's lots of examples of community ownership, but I think what we'd like to see is that involvement at every level. And what we've seen lacking so far is involvement at the government level, of people really being involved in shaping the solutions. So, for example, in the report that we did, people with lived experience of being on a low income really wanted to be involved in addressing that power balance with landlords. They wanted to kind of have a seat at the table with energy companies, with social and housing providers to come up with solutions for addressing that imbalance of power. And that's the kind of solution we'd like to see people being involved with.
Thank you. I guess just final question for me is there a role for trusted intermediaries to play in communicating information on the energy transition, and how can the government best identify those intermediaries? So thinking about the organisations or the people that are communicating the information to the public, is how can we better do that, and who might those people or institutions be?
We think that there is a role for trusted intermediaries based on the research that we did. People identified Ofgem and local councils, and also local energy champions as people that they would trust to give that advice.
Chair.
Luke, let Luke finish asking his question.
I'm interested to hear what
I'm sure you are. I'm sure we all are.
Oh, okay.
I'm glad that, yes. Go for it.
Do you think that Ofgem are a trusted intermediary that is capable of the communication that is required for this task?
That's a good question. I'm not sure we're qualified to answer. I think what we can say is that's what people felt, that's an organisation people felt they wanted to hear from, and that they would trust to give that advice.
People know who Ofgem are?
Oh, quite.
I mean, I just... that's not a reflection on Ofgem. I'm not sure that people should necessarily know who they are, but...
an energy supplier.
Sorry? Yeah. We don't know.
I don't know the full awareness of Ofgem, but that was what people said in the research.
Okay, I think that's me.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was curious to know if people understood exactly what Ofgem was. DESNZ is going to publish a public participation strategy this year. He told us that it will set a framework for how governments and other organisations can more effectively engage the public and empower them to participate in transition to net zero. What would you most like to see included?
I would go back to the answer about sort of involvement of people with lived experience. I think public engagement has a number of strands, doesn't it? Sort of from behavioural science to communication to education to involvement, and what we'd like to see is more emphasis on the involvement strand.